Translocation by Are Thoresen, Chapter 6. Translocation of spiritual forces in homeopathy and in electromagnetic radiation. Using all our tools. This chapter will deal with the splitting of spirit from matter in homeopathy as an explanatory part of the following. Electricity is the carrier of aramanic beings. Electricity produced from earth warmth creates gnome-type demonic beings. Electricity produced from water creates undine-type demonic beings. Electricity produced from winds creates sylph-like demonic beings. Electricity produced from sunlight creates salamander-like demonic beings. Electricity produced from nuclear power creates azuric-type demonic beings. Magnetism as the carrier of luciferic beings. Electromagnetism as a carrier of both aramanic and luciferic beings. Chapter 6 is the most interesting and important chapter of this book, and is in fact the reason why this book came into being. Our whole society is based on using electricity, and is seen to be a much better solution than using coal or gas. I personally believe this is not the case. The way electricity is produced is of crucial importance and usually contrary to what most people consider to be beneficial. In the production of electricity, natural elementals living in the four elements are converted and imprisoned into the sub-nature, into the realm of aramanic powers. The higher the elemental forces transformed are, the lower the sub-earthly forces will be. As such, the elemental demonic forces carried by solar panels and nuclear fusion will bring about the worst possible scenario for the emerging Christ force. These created demons are riding electricity, magnetism, and electromagnetism as adversarial spirits. In many alternative and New Age inspired circles, energy is often talked about synonymously to spiritual. This is a great mistake that has several unhappy consequences. Energy is a part of the material physical world and can be measured by the help of physical instruments as EMR. Spiritual beings or forces cannot by any means be measured. They can only be physically observed through their effect on the physical material realm. However, they can, with the right procedure, be split from their physical component. Electricity and electromagnetism are indeed physical and energetic and not spiritual. To understand this very difficult concept, I will start by explaining homeopathy and how homeopathic remedies are created. This procedure can be a learning example for the rest of this chapter. Homeopathic concepts and theories have been the subject of discussion, study and trial in many cultures: Chinese, Indian, Persian, American and European. Homeopathy is a very controversial medical modality. The reason for this is the specialities of the homeopathic remedies. In herbal therapy, we give different plants or herbs containing pharmacologically active substances. In acupuncture, we stimulate certain points or nerves which release certain substances or endorphins. In homeopathy, from a materialistic viewpoint, we really give nothing that can be measured chemically, except the vehicle that carries the potentized remedy. On standard scientific analysis, the lactose pills that carry the diluted and potentized homeopathic remedies contain no detectable compounds except lactose, alcohol and water. The effects of the homeopathic remedy is then as such purely spiritual. How can it be possible to take the spirit of the plants, toxins or metals out of their material foundation and transfer the spirit to an inert remedy? If this is understood, what follows in this book will become clear. History of homeopathy. The fundamental principle of homeopathy is found in the sentence similia similibus curentur. Like things by like things shall be cured, or like cures like. In more precise terms, a homeopathic remedy cures a disease whose symptoms resemble the symptoms evoked in a healthy body by a toxic dose of the agent itself. This principle has been known since antiquity. Philosophers and healers like Hippocrates and Paracelsus, also expressed the same ideas. The principle comes, of course, from an ancient holistic concept that the symptoms are manifested by the body itself in order to help an organ or process that is failing to perform properly. However, Christian Friedrich Samuel Hahnemann, 1755 to 1843, a German physician, assumed all the ideas and theories and developed them systematically into a holistic system of therapy. Hahnemann's pioneering book, The Organon, is still a key homeopathic reference book today. Hahnemann calls this system homeopathy after the Greek words homoios, which means like or equivalent, and pathos, which means suffering or malfunction. Homeopathy is written in different European countries as homeopathy, 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 or homeopathy. Early in his medical career, Hahnemann knew that the symptoms of intoxication from a substance resembled those that the same substance could cure in very low doses. In other words, when specially prepared in minute doses, the pathogenic substance was made into a remedy. He experimented with lower and lower doses, higher and higher dilutions. During this experimentation with increasing dilutions and his testing of diluted substances, he accidentally discovered the principle of potentization. This is that the tincture or substance that we want to prepare as a remedy must be diluted and succussed, potentized, serially to such a dilution that its concentration eventually approaches zero. At the higher dilutions, the laws of physics would say that there could not be a single molecule of the original material in the remedy. Paradoxically, however, and in total contrast to what one might expect from principles of conventional pharmacology, this process potentizes the remedy, i.e. its therapeutic effect becomes clearer, cleaner, more powerful and more exact as the dilution increases. Two examples of clinical homeopathy. Late on a Saturday night, a 7-year-old boy grabbed a red-hot poker and threw it on the hearth to prevent his granny's carpet from being damaged. In the process, he gave himself a potential third-degree burn, 3 centimeters long, on his thumb and index finger. The house was many miles from the nearest pharmacy, and the boy's granny had no anti-burn or analgesic remedies of any kind. However, as it was a farmhouse, there were nettles growing within 5 meters of the kitchen door. In first aid homeopathy, Urtica urens, common stinging nettle, is recommended for burns. For want of something better to do, the boy's father, a vet and complementary therapist who was visiting for the night, made a crude nettle extract in tap water. He diluted 1 drop of nettle juice in a cupful of water, succussed it, and serially repeated the dilution 5 more times. He gave the boy a spoonful every 10 minutes for about an hour. The boy stopped screaming within the first 10 seconds after the first spoonful. Within 2 to 3 days, the lesion had disappeared without a trace. Standard university training would regard this as impossible. That burn should have turned septic and taken 2 to 3 weeks to heal. But the clinical outcome was as described, unbelievable. One wonders who would buy expensive analgesics and antihistamines or steroid drugs to treat burns, stings, hives, or other skin allergies if all one had to do is find a nettle leaf in the nearest ditch and make a crude homemade dilution of Urtica urens for oral use. However, Urtica does not always work as dramatically as in that case. Many years ago, a worried father brought his little girl to me. The girl had been struggling to live for the previous 2 years. At age 4, she had drunk concentrated sodium hydroxide, and her esophagus was very badly damaged. It was like dry parchment, lifeless and totally functionless. She had been through countless infections and courses of antibiotic during the 2 to 3 years that elapsed since the accident, and all her food and drink had to be given via an indwelling nasogastric tube. In this case, the cause of the trauma or disease was obvious. It was the corrosive action of the sodium hydroxide. I then took some sodium hydroxide and potentized it, which means that I made an isopathic remedy from it. She began to take this remedy, 5 drops twice daily. After just a few days, vitality and function began to return to the esophagus. After 3 weeks, the nastrogastric tube was removed. After 2 months, she was able to eat normally again and remained cured. Strictly speaking, this case was an example of the clinical use of isopathy rather than homeopathy. The homeopathic method. Conventional medicine is gradually accepting the therapeutic value of acupuncture. Unfortunately, this is not the case with homeopathy. The reasons for this are multiple, but one of the main reasons is that the remedies, at the usual dilutions, do not contain one single molecule of the initial substance. Another reason is that the clinical effect of homeopathy often seems to disappear in double-blind studies. We will consider this in more detail later. Homeopaths describe what is left in the remedy as the information structure of the substance, some kind of resonance or hidden information. Of course, scientifically minded doctors or researchers find this difficult to grasp or acknowledge. That the vehicle, be it water, alcohol solution or lactose, can carry the information of a plant or metal without one single molecule present is in itself incredible. That this information can communicate with the body and induce the body to heal its diseases, such as psoriasis, depression or rheumatoid arthritis, is totally absurd to materialistic scientific doctors. And this intellectual riddle does not get any easier when we consider the great amount of time and energy spent on trying to explain how the diluent, aqueous or alcoholic vehicle, or the lactose base, can carry this information pattern. When we consider that some manufacturing methods of homeopathic pills involve the evaporation of the liquid vehicle when the pills are made. Homeopaths and scientists agree that continuous serial dilution of a substance eventually reduces its physical or chemical concentration to 0. But homeopathic experts claim that succussion, vigorous shaking and striking of the container between each dilution, induces thousands of small bubbles in the vehicle and preserves the information pattern that induces the therapeutic effect of the remedy. This is where we will part from both the materialistic school medicine and materialistic alternative medicine. Homeopaths suggest that succussion induces a structural change in the water molecules in the surface tension layer between water and bubbles. In this way, the remedy-free vehicle preserves the information structure or therapeutic signal of the remedy that induces its clinical effect. According to Avogadro's law, the number of molecules in 1 gram of any substance is 6 times 10 to the power of 23. When we dilute any substance 24 times at 1 to 10 each time, i.e. D24, the concentration is 1 times 10 to the power of 24. Theoretically, there are no molecules left in the solution at that dilution. In practice, it is not possible to detect the substance even at dilutions like D7, D8. Conventional medicine classes homeopathic remedies above D6 as having no possible toxic effect. At least it cannot reject homeopathic remedies on grounds of toxicity or lack of safety. From my experiences with spirits, adversarial elementals and demons, I know that succussion also has another effect on the spiritual content of any substance. I will describe this as follows. For many years I wondered why, when making the remedy, it had to be shaken so vigorously between each of the potency stages. When I began to see the elemental forces in medical plants as well as in diseases, I entered into a deeper understanding of the procedure of making a homeopathic remedy. The characteristics of the elemental beings within the medical plant used for making the remedy looks very much like the pathological being that causes the disease. This is the basis of the homeopathic law of similia similibus currentur. Homeopaths know or postulate that the energy of the plant or the metal mysteriously translocates into the water when the dilution is shaken. This shaking enables the spirit of the healing plant to enter or translocate into the remedy. This is then called potentiation. It makes the water potent. I've described homeopathy in such a depth because what happens here gives a very good foundation to understand how earth radiation and electromagnetic radiation can be handled. The important insight or learning we can draw from our understanding of homeopathy, which we will see later can be used within electromagnetic radiation and earth radiation, is that the spiritual effect or activity can be divided or split from its material foundation. For example, the spiritual effect or activity in arsenate, arsenicum, can in homeopathy be divided from the physical substance of arsenicum, and thus can be used as a medicine, while the toxic substance can be thrown away. If the spiritual part of a substance can be split off from its material foundation, the same effect can also be achieved with electromagnetic radiation. First, some definitions and explanations about electromagnetic radiation and earth radiation. Arthur Firstenberg, in his book The Invisible Rainbow, shows and argues that electricity seems to be the main or underlying cause in almost all diseases. Rudolf Steiner argues that all diseases are caused by the Ahrimanic and Luciferic powers. As electricity is food for the Ahrimanic beings, both are right. Electricity influences us today mainly through the electromagnetic radiation. To understand this complicated chapter, we need to know what exactly electricity, magnetism, and electromagnetism are. What is electricity in the eyes of modern science? The word electron is taken from the Greek word electron, meaning light gold, after the colour of amber. Electricity is, from a physical point of view, a summary name for all phenomena that are caused by static or moving electric charges associated with electric and magnetic fields. Electricity and magnetism are closely connected and together form electromagnetism, one of the four basic forces of physics known today. Physical principles of electricity in the eyes of modern science. The material carriers of the electric charge today are thought mainly to be negatively charged electrons and positively charged protons or ions. Charges of the same name repel each other. Opposite charges are attracted. Static or moving electric charges are the sources of the electric field, and moving charges are moreover the cause of magnetic fields. By periodically oscillating electric charge, electromagnetic waves are excited. The propagation of the physical part of light in space is associated with such electromagnetic phenomena. The electric current is based on the movement of electric charges. It is explained in solids by the movement of free electrons, in liquids and gases by ion motion. In the case of solids, a distinction is made between electrical conductors, non-conductors, and semiconductors. The driving force of the electric current is the voltage measured in volts, which correspond to the potential difference between 2 points of the electric field. The smallest free positive or negative electric charge quantity is called an elementary charge and is a universal natural constant. The electrical field. Each electrical charge generates in its vicinity an electric field where strength and direction are indicated by the electric field strength. It is defined as a vectoral quantity that indicates the force with which the electric field acts on a small sample charge at a given location. Frictional electricity. Frictional electricity was first found around 550 BC and was described by Thales of Miletus, who used amber as a tool. The applied friction force as such has no influence. This results in a separation of the electrical charges, which are distributed differently on the materials used. In 1733, Charles Dufay describes the two types of charge as glass electricity, which corresponds to the positive charge, and as resin electricity, which corresponds to the negative charge. He also realized that the two types of charge can neutralize each other. Charles Dufay further says, and this may be important for us today, quote, "You do not know the elementary things of electricity. You know that there is what is called friction electricity, that you bring a glass rod to unfold a force by rubbing it with some kind of rasp or a resin rod. Thereby the glass rod or the resin rod gets electrically charged, that is, they attract small bodies or shreds of paper. You also know that the observation of the phenomena has gradually revealed that in that unfolding are the two forces which emanate in one case from the grated glass rod, in the other case from the grated resin rod or sealing wax rod. Therefore one distinguishes the qualitative glass electricity and resin electricity, or by merely generally expressing positive electricity and negative electricity. The glass electricity would be the positive, the resin electricity the negative. Now the peculiar thing is that positive electricity always attracts negative electricity in a certain way. So we see that the forces of electricity that face each other have a certain tension and strive for balance. The attempt will often have been made in front of you." End quote. Contact electricity. The term contact electricity was coined by Alessandro Volta and stood in contrast to the thesis of animal electricity represented by Luigi Galvani. In fact, the touch electricity comprises of a very wide range of different electrical phenomena occurring at the interface of contacting substances or at the interface with the environment. The friction electricity is in this sense a special case of contact electricity. Electricity in nature. In nature, electricity is most directly and spectacularly manifested in the appearance of lightning. In animated beings, electrical phenomena are connected with the nervous and muscular activity. Some fish, such as the echinodome and the eel, can generate high voltages up to a few hundred volts and deliver surges of up to a few amperes. Magnetism. The word magnetism derives from the Greek word magnetis, stone from magnesia. Magnetism is a physical phenomenon that manifests itself by a certain force between magnets, magnetizable substances or moving electric charges. The force is represented by a magnetic field, whereby the density and orientation of the field lines illustrate the strength and direction of the acting force. In 1820, the Danish physicist and chemist Hans Christian Ørsted happened to observe during a lecture how a wire fed by an electric current deflected a compass point. In 1831, Michael Faraday discovered the principle of electromagnetic induction, according to which a moving permanent magnet in a wire loop excites an electrical current. It now becomes very clear that the electricity and magnetism are closely linked. As electromagnetism, they form one of the four fundamental forces of physics known today. From 1861 to 1864, James Clerk Maxwell formulated the theoretical foundations of electromagnetism with the Maxwell equations named after him. What is magnetism in the eyes of modern science? Magnetism is one aspect of the combined electromagnetic force. It refers to the physical phenomena arising from the force caused by magnets, objects that produce fields that attract or repel other objects. The motion of electrically charged particles gives rise to magnetism. The force acting on an electrically charged particle in a magnetic field depends on the magnitude of the charge, the velocity of the particle, and the strength of the magnetic field. All materials experience magnetism, some more strongly than others. Permanent magnets, made from materials such as iron, produce the strongest effects, known as ferromagnetism. With rare exceptions, this is the only form of magnetism strong enough to be felt by people. Opposites attract, still in the eyes of modern science. Magnetic fields are generated by rotating electric charges. All electrons have a property of angular momentum or spin. Most electrons tend to form pairs in which one of them is spin up and the other is spin down. Two electrons cannot occupy the same energy state at the same time, so their magnetic fields are in opposite directions. They should then cancel each other. However, some atoms contain one or more unpaired electrons whose spin can produce a directional magnetic field. The direction of their spin determines the direction of the magnetic field. When a significant majority of unpaired electrons are aligned with their spins in the same direction, they combine to produce a magnetic field that is strong enough to be felt on a macroscopic scale. Magnetic field sources are dipolar, having a north and south magnetic pole. Opposite poles, north and south, attract, and like poles, north and north or south and south, repel. The Earth itself is a giant magnet. The magnetic field is created by circulating electric currents within the molten metallic core. My unscientific conclusions. Lucifer travels with the magnetic forces and is fed by electricity. Ahriman. Ahriman travels with the electric forces and is fed by magnetism. Lucifer. Electromagnetic radiation, still in the eyes of modern science. Cancer in humans chronically exposed to strong electrical fields. The National Cancer Institute, USA, stated on May the 27th, 2016, quote, "Many studies and scientific reviews have evaluated possible associations between exposure to non-ionizing EMFs and risk of cancer in children. Most of the research was on leukemia and brain tumors, the two most common cancers in children. Studies have examined associations of these cancers with living near power lines, with magnetic fields in the home, and with the exposure of parents to high levels of magnetic fields in the workplace. No consistent evidence for an association between any source of non-ionizing EMF and cancer has been found." End quote. The above statement must be viewed with great skepticism. No government will admit that EMR, especially those caused by power lines, can be the cause of cancer. This is because modern industry depends totally on electric power. Without electric power, mass unemployment, social unrest and anarchy would destroy the economies and social cohesion of modern societies. A colleague living in Ireland emailed me with this information. Some years ago, death rate from cancer in workers in a large national research institute was noted to be far above that in the general population. The institute had several laboratories in different parts of Ireland. An investigation was conducted to determine if the deaths could be work-related. The team included a medical doctor who specialised in environmental medicine and trade union representatives from each of the labs involved. I was one of the investigators. Exposure to lab reagents, gases, chemicals, carcinogens, nuclear materials, etc. was examined. We could not find a satisfactory reason to explain the abnormal death rate. In one lab, two genetically unrelated scientists had died within a short interval of each other. The cause of death in both cases was a rare brain tumour. Both men worked in adjoining offices. The fuse box for the lab's power supply was just outside the wall of one office, and multiple power cables from that fuse box ran directly over the heads of both men. The doctor discounted any causality between the cancer in both men and exposure to an electrical field from the cables over their heads. Though I am an experienced researcher and veterinary clinician, not qualified in human medicine, I disagree with his medical verdict. I'm convinced that my colleagues died due to cancer triggered by EMR emitted by the power cables. When a wire is moved in a magnetic field, the field induces a current in the wire. Conversely, a magnetic field is produced by an electric charge in motion. This is in accordance with Faraday's law of induction, which is the basis for electromagnets, electric motors, and generators. A charge moving in a straight line, as through a straight wire, generates a magnetic field that spirals around the wire. When that wire is formed into a loop, the field becomes a donut shape or a torus. In some applications, direct current is used to produce a constant field in one direction that can be switched on and off with the current. This field can then deflect a movable iron lever, causing an audible click. This is the basis for the telegraph invented in the 1830s by Samuel F. B. Morse, which allowed for long-distance communication over wires using a binary code based on long and short duration pulses. The spiritual backgrounds of magnetism and electricity. According to Rudolf Steiner, magnetism arises from the fact that the forces of the sound ether, also called chemical ether, are pushed down into the area of the sub-physical lower devachan, which is known as the kingdom of Ahriman. Quote, if one pushes a body even further down than to the physical world, then one enters the sub-physical world, the sub-astral world, the lower or the bad lower devachan, and the lower or bad upper devachan. The bad astral world is the region of Lucifer, the bad one lower devachan is the territory of Ahriman, and the poor upper devachan is the territory of Asuras, and if one pushes the chemical ether further down than under the physical plane, into the poor lower devachanic world, magnetism arises, and if one pushes the light into submaterial, that is, one step lower than the material world, the electricity is generated. End quote. GA 130. Incorporation of the electric and magnetic forces in the Lemurian period. The human and magnetic forces were absorbed into nature only in the Lemurian period. Quote from Steiner, GA 130. There was a point in evolution where out of the cosmos, what we know today as magnetic and especially as electrical forces is established within the human being. For in us also the magnetic and electric forces live in a mysterious way. Before this age, in the Lemurian period, man lived on earth without the magnetic and electrical forces that developed spiritually in his nervous system, between the nervous effects and the blood effects. Then these powers were incorporated into him. Let us disregard the magnetic forces, and let us disregard a certain part of the electric forces. By the fact that these forces, which I want to designate as electric forces in galvanism, in voltism, and so forth, that is, those forces which are so deeply involved in civilization, have in the primeval time been implanted in the human organism, with the human. For some time these forces could remain unknown to human consciousness. Man carried them inside, but outwardly they remained unknown to him. Well, we got to know the magnetic, the other electrical forces, except the galvanism and voltism earlier. For galvanism, the electricity of contact, which more than one thinks of today, impresses our karma from the outside on our age. It was discovered, as you know, only at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century by Galvani and Volta. One usually thinks too little about such things. Just think, this galvanic, he prepares a frog's fire. He jerks by accidentally fixing him to the window and touching the frog's fire with iron. This is the beginning of all the discoveries, all the inventions that today dominate our earth through the electric current. It's the first time in such a short time. One usually does not think, how come that humanity did not know such a thing before? Suddenly, in a very wonderful way, this thought appears in a human being. He is struck on it, this man, on this thought. Of course, our materialistic age does not think about such things, but that is why our materialistic age understands absolutely nothing scientifically of the real career of the world. The truth is this: after humanity had passed through the time in the Lemurian time, where the forces which are now passing through electricity in electricity, and which are invisibly working in man, after this age has passed, electricity lived, in a sense, within man. Now development does not progress as easily as it draws, so with a simple stroke, one only thinks, time goes on so that it flows to infinity. But that is a very abstract idea. In truth, time moves so that the development is reversed again and runs back. Not only in space do these movements take place in the lemniscate, but also in time. End quote. From GA 130. According to Rudolf Steiner, electricity is to be understood as light in the submaterial state. Quote again from GA 130. Electricity is light in a submaterial state. Here the light is compressed in the heaviest of ways. It must be said to inwardness to light. It is itself in every point. Heat can expand in 3 directions of space forth. It is fourfold. It has inwardness as fourth. Electricity arises when the forces of the light ether are pushed into the subsurface reflection of the astral world, which is the kingdom of Lucifer. End quote, GA 130. New quote, GA 224. Quote, on the other hand, electricity is Ahrimanic light that dates back to ancient times. End quote. Electricity is Ahrimanized solar power of earlier world development levels. Quote from GA 224. We know that once the Earth and the Sun were one body. However, that is a long, very long time ago. In the Saturn time, it was solar time. Then there was a brief repetition of this condition during the Earth time. But there is something left in the Earth that belongs to it. We'll get that out again today. And we not only get it out of the state of repetition that occurred during our Earth time by heating our rooms with hard coal, but we get it out by using the electricity. For from those times in which, according to the old Saturn period, to the solar time, the Sun and the Earth, there was a reason why we have electricity on Earth. With electricity we have a force that is old-fashioned with Earth, that is solar power, sun power hidden in the Earth. End quote, GA 224. Some words on the morality within electricity. And this is from GA 220. Quote, you see, when people of my age were still young badgers, it never occurred to anyone to talk about atoms in the field of physics other than that small, inelastic, or even my own elastic globules collide with each other and the like, and then one has calculated the results of these shocks. And no one would have thought of presenting the atom as it is today, as an electron, as an entity that consists entirely of electricity. The thought of the people has been completely enthralled by electricity, and not so long ago. Today we speak of the atoms as something in which there is a kind of little sun around a centre that stores electricity. We talk about electrons. So, when we look into the world gear, we suspect electricity everywhere. Already the outer culture is connected with the thinking. People who would not be on the electric tracks would not imagine the atoms so electrically. And if one looks now to the ideas which one had before the age of electricity, then one can say of them, they have still given the nature thinker the freedom to think at least abstractly of the spiritual into nature. A tiny, tiny remnant of scholastic realism was still there. But electricity has gotten on the nerves of modern man, and has cut out of the nerves everything that is directed towards the spiritual. It has come even further. The whole honest light which floods through the world space has been gradually slandered, even something like the electricity. Of course, when one talks about these things today, it is naturally someone who has completely submerged his head in the electric wave of culture, pretending that they were talking nonsense. But this is because this man, with his head watching it as nonsense, with his tongue held out like the dog, who has become quite warm, and with the burden of history on his back, is dragging himself along and burdened with historical concepts, and cannot speak out of the immediate present. For you see, with electricity you enter an area that presents itself to imaginative viewing differently than other natural areas. As long as one had remained in the light, in the world of sounds, in optics and acoustics, one did not need to judge morally what a stone, plant, animal, in the light of colour, in the world of hearing, manifested as sound, because one had a, though faint, echo of the reality of concepts and ideas. But the electricity drove off this reverberation. And if on the one hand today one cannot find the reality for the world of moral impulses, one is, on the other hand, in the field of what is today regarded as the most important ingredient of nature, certainly not capable of morality to find. If one today ascribes real efficacy to the moral impulses, so that they had the power to become a sensual reality later, like a plant germ, then he is considered a half-fool. But if someone came round today and attributed moral effects to natural effects, then he would be considered a complete fool. And yet, anyone who has ever consciously felt the electric current go through his nervous system with real spiritual intuition knows that electricity is not merely a natural current, but that electricity in nature is at the same time immoral, and that at that moment where we enter the domain of the electric, we enter into the moral at the same time. For if you turn your knuckle somewhere into a closed stream, you immediately feel that you are expanding your inner life into an area of the inner man, where at the same time the moral comes out. You cannot look for the natural electricity that lies in man in any other area than where at the same time the moral impulses come out. Whoever experiences the totality of the electrical experiences at the same time the natural moral. And unsuspectingly, the modern physicists have actually made a strange hocus pocus. They introduced the atom electrically and forgot, from the general consciousness of time, that when they electrically present the atom, they impart a moral impulse to that atom, to every atom. They make it at the same time a moral being. But I am speaking incorrectly now, for the atom, by making it an electron, is not made into a moral being, but made into an immoral being. In electricity, however, the moral impulses, the natural impulses, are floating, but these are the immoral ones. These are the instincts of evil that must be overcome by the upper world. And the biggest contrast to electricity is the light, and it's a blending of good and evil when you look at light as electricity. One has just lost the real view of evil in the order of nature. If one is unaware that one actually makes the atoms by electrifying them, the bearers of evil, not only, as I have stated in the last course, the bearers of the dead, but the bearers of evil. One makes them the bearers of the dead by making them atoms in the first place, by presenting matter atomically. At the moment when one electrifies this part of matter, at the same time nature is conceived as evil. For electrical atoms are evil, little demons. End quote, GA 220. Some words on electricity, matter and human faults. From GA 93, quote, "Last time I read to you from a speech by the English Prime Minister Balfour. It had already been noted that certain things today are physical truths that are ancient occult insights, as you read in Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. You find there a place about electricity that literally means the same thing that the physicists are coming to bit by bit, but what you find is just a glimpse of what it is. It's the physical atom. Until 4 or 5 years ago, science was misunderstood by all external, not occultist science. It was thought to be a space-filling mass. Today one begins to recognize this physical atom as that which is really, to the fact that this physical atom behaves in the same way as the force of electricity as a lump of ice is to the water from which it is frozen. Imagine water that freezes to ice, so the ice is also water. And so the physical atom is nothing but frozen electricity. If you fully grasp this and go over and read the messages that were in all the scientific writings about the atoms until a few years ago, then you'll get roughly the right idea. Only since this short time can physics form an idea of what the physical atom is. It behaves like a lump of ice to the amount of water from which it is frozen. The physical atom is condensed electricity. I consider Balfour's speech something extraordinarily important. The fact has been known to occultists for millennia. Now one begins to know that the physical atom is condensed electricity. But there is still a second, to know what electricity itself is. This is still unknown. They do not know one thing, where the essence of electricity must be sought. This essence of electricity cannot be found through any external experimentation or outward perception. The secret that will be found is that electricity is exactly the same, if you can observe on a certain plane, what human thought is. Human thought is the same essence as electricity, the one time from the inside, the other from the outside. Whoever knows what electricity is knows that something lives in it that forms the atom when frozen. Here you have the bridge from human thought to the atom. You will get to know the building blocks of the physical world. They are small condensed monads, condensed electricity. And the moment when people will have realized this most elemental occult truth of thought, electricity and atom, in that moment they will realize something that will be the most important for the future and for the whole sixth sub-race. You will be able to build with the atoms through the power of thought. End quote. GA 93. Some words on electricity and the Ahrimanic doppelganger, and the following is from GA 178. The electricity that flows through the nervous system is not related to our mental life, as erroneously assumed in neuroscience, but to the Ahrimanic doppelganger, who seizes our body shortly before birth, but must also leave it shortly before death. The electrical wires are constantly inducing currents in us. All this removes from humanity the physical body, makes the physical body so that the soul does not get in at all. In the 19th century, science has discovered that the nervous system is permeated with electrical forces. She was right, this science. But if she believed that if the naturalists believed that the nervous energy that is ours, which is the basis of our imagination, is somehow related to the electrical currents passing through our nerves, then they are wrong. For the electric currents, those are the forces which are put into our being by the being which I've just described, are not at all our being. We already carry electrical currents in us, but they are purely Ahrimanic nature. These beings of high intelligence, but of pure Mephistophelian intelligence, and of a will more closely related to nature than can be said for the human will, once decided out of their own will not to live in the world in which they were destined to live by the wisdom gods of the upper hierarchy. They wanted to conquer the earth. They need bodies. They do not have their own bodies. They use as much of the human bodies as they can, because the human soul cannot quite fill the human body. Thus, as the human body evolves, these beings can, so to speak, enter this human body at a certain time before man is born, and under the threshold of our consciousness they accompany us. They cannot tolerate one thing in human life. They cannot tolerate death. Therefore, they must always leave this human body in which they establish themselves before it is struck dead. This is a very bitter disappointment always again, because they just want to conquer that, to stay in the human bodies beyond death. That would be a great achievement in the realm of these beings. They did not achieve that at first. End quote, GA 178. A way of using willing, the Christ force, and the knowledge of the middle point to fight the malevolent effects of electromagnetic radiation. One may also use willing in fighting the adversaries created by both electricity and electromagnetic radiation. This I would explain in depth. The spiritual reality behind electromagnetic radiation. Like everything else in the created universe, the phenomenon of electromagnetic radiation consists of a material part and a spiritual part. In the material world, particles and waves will also be considered as material, including the term energy, which is used in many alternative movements. The spiritual part is not the actual electromagnetic radiation itself, but the spirit beings that follow this radiation. These are the Ahrimanic and Luciferic beings, and these beings are riding within the hollowness of electricity and magnetism. The ethers of the divine world may be many or multi-dimensional, but when the ethers are forced down in the sub-natural world, they lose their multi-dimensionality and become polar, with a hollow in the middle. This hollowness shows the absence of the divine, and it is here we can introduce the Christ force. When electricity is created, it forms elementary beings of an Ahrimanic nature, and when we produce electromagnetic radiation via electricity, we also create Luciferic elemental spirits due to the magnetic part of this radiation. Electricity is the fallen light ether, and magnetism is the fallen chemical ether, both of which can be categorized as fallen spiritual forces that are then referred to as sub-nature demonic elementals. These divine ethers, light and chemical, thus fall into the powers of the sub-nature, and as a result, malicious elemental beings are created. There are different degrees of malevolence depending on if the electricity is generated from earth warmth, coal, hydropower, wind power, wind turbines, wave power, solar panels. The elementals created from these different sources look quite different, but they also have different pathological and social effects. The worst and most pathological elemental beings are formed when solar panels are used in the production of electricity. This is also the most logical when thinking that something so sacred as the light is being pushed into the sub-natural creation of electricity. It becomes like a double degradation of the light. An interesting experience from Germany. With this knowledge of electromagnetic radiation, I did the following experiment. In Germany, at a horse centre, there were 14 horses, all of which were lame to different degrees. However, all of them had pain in the spleen area between the 16th and the 18th rib at the back, and this pain had then caused the different types of lameness. Just 100 metres from the stable there was a G4 mast. The electromagnetic radiation from this mast could be felt very strongly, and it was obvious that this EMR made the horses sick. I had gathered a group of 12 people, and at a distance of approximately 50 metres, we all attempted to mentally push apart the forces of the adversaries abiding in the mast, and thereby create a space for the middle point, the Christ force. After 10 minutes, all pain in the back of the horses was gone, and within a few days all of them were free of lameness. I checked the situation 2 years later, and everything was still fine in this stable. The pathological aspect of the radiation was gone, although the mobile phones still worked. The spiritual was separated from the material. This treatment was done by people that did not see the spiritual elemental beings. An interesting example from the United States. A similar example I experienced in the United States. Some colleagues and I sat in a restaurant that was rigged up with about 20 television sets, each showing their separate program. All who were eating sat like zombies and just put the food in their mouths whilst their eyes were focused deep into the television emissions. I related the incidents of the horse experience in Germany to my colleagues, and then I proceeded to make the following experiment. Concentrating on one of the TVs, I separated the Aramanic and Luciferic powers, and almost immediately there was a significant change in the people who were watching this particular one. Suddenly they became humanized, taking an interest in the food they were putting in their mouths, becoming alive in their movements, talking together and showing obvious changes in their behavior. My colleagues observed this change with astonishment. The middle point of mechanical and electrical devices. This subject is of utmost importance both now and in the years to come. Today we are all under a very severe attack from electromagnetic radiation. This radiation comes from 4G masts, 5G masts, cell phones and all kinds of electromagnetic devices. Since I discovered the middle point in living humans and animals, I have for several years tried to find the middle point also in dead man-made devices. Contrary to belief that these devices are dead, they are creations of the human mind and are thus endowed with a form of elemental life. They also contain the elemental forces of the Luciferic and the Aramanic realm, without which the material existence would not be possible. They also had the midpoint, the Christ point, between the two forces. I have tried, with 4G masts, with TV sets and with cell phones, to concentrate my willing and intending mind on the middle point of these devices, expand this middle point and thus weaken the adversarial forces. Using this kind of treatment, I have observed a marked effect on the allergic pathologies of the people and animals affected by electromagnetic radiation. Sensitivity coming from EM devices, the allergic reactions to radiation and the resulting physical pain have completely disappeared after such a concentrated effort, after such a treatment of only 10 minutes. How can this be possible? If we think about the making of homeopathic remedies, we split to a certain extent the physical remedy from the spiritual remedy, and use the spiritual part as the medical remedy, without having to care about the toxic effects of the material substance. It is then also possible to split the toxic part of the radiation from the devices described, the part that belongs to the adversaries, to Lucifer and Ahriman, and just keep the functional part, which is the TV pictures, the cell phone conversation, or the electric heating of a house. In such a partial splitting, we have to use our willing mind, where the divided willing is first led down into the earth and then allowed to rise up again. At the halfway point, it must be met by the intending thoughts of the mind, and in this meeting of will and intent, a force is created to split the pathological forces from the physical, at least to such a degree that the pathological effect of the radiation disappears. To repeat, I consider the middle to be the only force of reality, our only salvation. Our logical conception of reality in making everything into polarities is for me like being dragged into mire, the mire of illusion. The polarities seem to me to be an expression of this great illusion, whilst the Trinity expresses the reality. It is of vital importance to find this third aspect in all uses of electricity, magnetism, nuclear power, cosmic streams, or corporal balances, otherwise the Ahrimanic luciferic forces will dominate. We find the same opposition between duality and trinity in the soul forces of thinking, feeling, and willing. Within each we must find the middle point, the middle force of love. If we can then relate to and use this middle force, this power of love as a fourth stream permeating the cosmos, we will be victorious. We have a cosmic cross, expressed by the morning, evening, midday, midnight forces. Our only salvation is to add the force of love to the fundamental forces of thinking, feeling, and willing. That is why the cross is a symbol reflecting the love of Jesus Christ. Summary and conclusion. Within human medicine, we have to treat the disease in a transformative way, not just suppress or translocate it. This is discussed in Chapter 4. Within veterinary medicine, we have to understand that almost all diseases of animals come from the human beings, and to make a true cure, the human being has to be treated in a transformative way. In treating the human, the animal is automatically healed. I have seen for many years that most methods of treating diseases with acupuncture actually enforce the translocation of the disease to other people and/or animals. Actually, almost all diseases in animals are translocated from their owners in a natural way, but the traditional alternative treatment enforces and/or uses this system. We must here understand the 5-element thinking contrary to the 12-element thinking. In homeopathy, in where the translocational law of Herring states that a translocation of the pathological entity actually is the healing, we have the same problem: how to use the remedies in a transformative way. Many people who work in the field of isolating houses against malevolent earth radiation have to change the devices frequently, often once a month. Within this field of medicine, we have the choice between translocation and transformation of the described forces. We can flee from them by changing the place of the bed, translocate them through various devices such as copper, or really transform them through an understanding of what these forces are and where they come from. The pathological and malevolent effects from electromagnetic radiation are caused by the adversarial forces riding the electromagnetic wave from which they can be separated. Then the pathological effect of the electromagnetic radiation will disappear, hypersensitivity will vanish, and we can use electricity as before. We must understand that these adversarial forces come from the production of the electricity and cannot be transformed at the present stage of time. We can easily translocate these forces or try to transform them. If the electricity comes from a production based on earthly forces such as fossil fuels, we will have to deal with the transformed elementals of the earth, the demonic gnomes. If the electricity comes from a production based on water forces like waterfalls, waves, or tides, we will have to deal with the transformed elementals of the water, the demonic undines. If the electricity comes from a production based on wind forces, as with wind turbines, we will have to deal with the transformed elementals of the wind, the demonic sylphs. If the electricity comes from a production based on light forces such as sun panels, we will have to deal with the transformed elementals of the light, the demonic salamanders, and they are the worst to deal with. If the electricity comes from atomic nuclear plants, we have to deal with the transformed elementals of the Asuras. If the electricity comes from a production based on etheric forces, we will have to deal with the transformed elementals of the human being, the Ahrimanic double. It is therefore of vital importance that we find another source of energy without harnessing the destructive power of electricity. Both Rudolf Steiner and Edgar Cayce described that in Old Atlantis they used energy coming from, or was directed by, crystals. In my opinion, the energy was cosmic, and the crystals were used to harness and veil it.